International Media TV. Television that listens to you.
Hi, I'm Johnnie Burrell. Welcome to the program.
Hi, everyone. My name's Rachel Rosen. I'm Director of Programming for SF Film, and it's my great honor to welcome you to this afternoon's presentation of the Golden Gate Persistence of Vision Award to Madeline Anderson. So I want to thank our premier venue partner, SF MoMA. We're so delighted to be doing this program, and all our festival programming week here in this beautiful theater. We really want to thank our co-presenters for this program, the Museum of the African Diaspora. It's a great museum. Also right around the corner, you should go visit it. This afternoon, what's going to happen is we're going to have an extended conversation with our honoree, Madeline Anderson, followed by a screening of 2 of her short nonfiction films. But first, I'm just going to give you a little history of the award. The award was established in 1997. The Golden Gate Persistence of Vision Award was established to honor the achievement of a filmmaker whose main body of work is outside the realm of the typical narrative filmmaking. So often it is a filmmaker who works in documentaries, short films, television, animation, experimental, or multi-platform work. Some of the previous recipients of the award include Lynn Hirschman-Leeson, Barbara Koppel, Matthew Barney, Lourdes Portillo, Errol Morris, Hetty Honigman, Guy Madden, Adam Curtis, I won't read all of them, I promise you, Faith Hubley, Robert Frank, and Jan Svankmajer. So this afternoon's recipient of the award, Madeline Anderson, is a groundbreaking filmmaker in very many ways, and you'll hear about those during our conversation. She started her career in the 50s when the filmmaking world, even the nonfiction world, was dominated by white men. But she had a desire to be a filmmaker from a young age, and she found the means to achieve this ambition and do it in spectacular fashion with her distinct and unique viewpoint intact. She's a producer, a director, an editor, and the list of firsts that accompanies her career is truly inspiring. As one learns more about Ms. Anderson's career, the one thing that may be surprising is that she isn't better known or more widely celebrated. And I've been glad to see in the past few years that she has been honored by some other major institutions. She was recently honored by the National Museum of African American History in Washington. And we're just happy to jump on this party train and give her the tribute and the award that honors her career as it deserves. So please now join me in welcoming the recipient of this year's Persistence of Vision Award, Madeline Anderson. Oh, here it is. Now, to conduct the conversation with Madeline Anderson, please welcome documentary filmmaker Dawn Porter, director of Gideon's Army and Trapped, amongst other films. She's currently working on a project about John Lewis, so we're really looking forward to seeing that. Welcome, Dawn Porter.
This on? Yes? Yours on?
Hello?
Yeah, yours is on. Okay, we're in business. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Rachel, for for putting on this magnificent program. I hope that you all are taking good advantage of the fact that we have such a spectacular program here in San Francisco. We are seeing some of the finest films in nonfiction, and I guess fiction, but I don't watch the fiction films that much, so I hope that they're good too, but I know that the documentaries are great, so, and that's our business. So congratulations again.
Thank you.
We are so honored to have you here. I saw you receive your award at the Smithsonian African American History Museum last fall with the wonderful Dr. Combs, who was the curator of film there. And it was after seeing that conversation, I was just so thrilled that San Francisco decided to continue on your honoring tour. So we're going to keep that going. What we're going to do is we'll have a conversation for about a half an hour, and then we'll open it up to some questions. So feel free to have some questions. You know, I want to start with now instead of starting at your beginning, and ask you, do you have a sense of how influential your work is to filmmakers like me?
In what way?
Do you know that we study your work, and it's not only, I think sometimes what I notice is that people make a big deal out of firsts.
Yes.
The first this and the first that. What I wanted to make a big deal of is your eye, your filmmaking selections, and bravery in storytelling and elegance in storytelling. But I wonder if, I wonder how it feels to be such a seminal documentarian, to be such an influence to all of us.
Well, I made my films like 50 years ago. And when I made the film, Integration Report 1, that was my first film. I finished it in 1959, and it took me a year to get a distributor. During that time, between the finish of the film and the distribution of the film, I was the one that was trying to find an audience or audiences for the films, and I didn't have any money to travel.
So far this sounds very familiar.
So what I did was to try to get invitations to number one, churches, number two, to schools, especially high schools and colleges, and then a number of just house screenings. Now, I made my film Integration Report 1 for specific reasons. Number one, I became a political activist when I was 14 years old. I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which was a very segregated and I would also say racist town. And it was almost like a southern town when you read about southern towns and the segregation. There were protests for equal opportunities in jobs, housing, education.
And what year would this be?
This was before, it was before 1954.
So before
Okay.
Brown v. Board.
Before Brown. we tried to do, there was an ongoing project in Brooklyn called the Ocean Hill Brownsville Project. And the Ocean Hill Brownsville Project was a program, it was a protest organization, and it was political, organized by politicians, trying to get equal opportunities in education in the segregated schools in Pennsylvania and in Lancaster.
I think people don't, we focus so much on the struggles in the South that people do not focus on how segregated, I've seen, footage of the outrage on busing by white parents in New York City.
That's right.
And I sure Pennsylvania, well, we know about the, Philadelphia, which is not that far from Lancaster, so,
right.
But that was also a hugely segregated area, particularly when we're thinking about pre-Brown.
So, after I made the film, I'm an optimist. I thought, oh, I have this film. I'm going to go to the networks. And I'm going to show them I'm a filmmaker. And it's professional looking. And I would like to have a chance to make other films on this subject. And would they hire me or give me money to make the films? Of course it was laughable. I was ridiculed, insulted. That didn't stop me from going back. I kept going back. But I saw from that I wasn't, after a year, it wasn't going to happen.
So tell me, before we move past Integration Report, which you're in for such a treat to see this. So it's shot on film, clearly. Where did you get the money for Integration Report? How did that come to be?
Yeah, I'd like to tell you about where I got the money and where I got the, and how I became a filmmaker.
Please.
When I came to New York from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I had some scholarship money to attend New York University. It wasn't much money, and I knew I had to get a job. And I was successful in getting a couple of jobs.
I've heard you were a good babysitter.
I needed more money. So I was looking for work, and there was a bulletin board at NYU advertising for a babysitter boarder. I thought, wow, I'd have a room, I'd have meals, and the location was not far from NYU. Ideal. The person who wanted to hire the babysitter boarder was Dr. Eleanor Decomp. Well, Eleanor Decomp was the wife of Richard Decomp, who was a documentary filmmaker of great renown, because he had been the young filmmaker that worked on a film by Robert Flaherty, which was famous, and it made Ricky famous because he was young. He was so talented. He was a genius. He was a genius. And here I was meeting Ricky Decomp. When I told them that I wanted to make films and why I wanted to make films, they were so supportive. And I went from being Ricky's babysitter to his in-house production manager when he set up a film company.
Now that is how you do it.
And that's
I don't know if you would say this, but it appears that your filmmaking is very much in that Leacock style, that verite, really celebration of humanity style. Could you talk about what influenced you in those days?
Well, Ricky's film company was located within a geographical area of a group called Filmmakers. The Filmmakers were Richard Van Dyke, Willard Van Dyke, Al Maisels, D.A. Pennybaker, and Shirley Clark. And so...
Kind of a good neighborhood.
But now, in addition to them being filmmakers, they were also inventors. They were working on techniques of filmmaking.
I've seen Pennybaker's cameras.
Right.
That he was constantly modifying and tinkering with cameras to
Exactly.
do what he wanted to do.
They were, I couldn't have received an education like that anywhere for any amount of money. Because in addition to that, they were artists. We looked at films, they critiqued films. I didn't know enough to do it, but I was there
Soaking it all.
taking it out, taking it in. And they were kind enough to invite me to sit in on their discussions. And I learned about film technique, I learned about artistry, and I learned, and this was very unusual at that time, I learned the technical aspects of filmmaking, which, paid me off. We don't have enough time to tell you, for me to tell you how much knowing both sides of it, artistry and technology.
I mean, you worked as an editor, and you edited on your own films sometimes, in addition to directing and producing. I like the credits on I Am Somebody. It's like directed by, produced by, edited by, thought up by.
I did that because if you, I worked as an editor for many years for the production houses that had the contracts for NET.
WNET, the
Which
public
is now
television
WNET.
station in New York City.
The public television station. I worked for about 7 years as an editor. Because when I found out that I was not going to be a producer-director, I went back to the beginning of filmmaking. And for two reasons. Number one, my husband and I were raising a family at the same time. We needed 2 salaries. But also because if I wanted to work in film, I had to have, as a black woman, I had to have something special. I couldn't just be an editor. I had to have something special that would make people consider until I had a track record. After I got a track record, people hired me for what I could do. But in order to get started, I had to sell myself as not only as an editor, but as a technician. And so, that's what I worked at as for 7 years. after I made Integration Report 1 in 1950, at the end of
I
1950.
love that you titled it Integration Report 1. That is an optimistic title. That means 2
That's my
and 3.
optimism.
Season 5 is coming.
That's my optimism. I thought I was going to be Ken Burns.
I think you mean Ken Burns thought he was going to be you.
2, 3, 4. I had it made. But I didn't.
What was the reception to when you did? So were you going to churches in the Northeast, all around the country? Were you in New York City area?
Well, because of lack of money, I was taking this money out of our household money.
Oh, my husband's here. We know this story.
I couldn't go very far, but I could go to Philadelphia. I could go to New Jersey. And if I really scrimped, I could go to Washington. So I went up to all those places. Now you have to remember too, that at the time I made the films, our people were not very educated as to the value of film as a tool for education. Also, they didn't have the money.
Mm-hmm.
Many of these institutions were just, make it on their own. They didn't have money for films, and films cost money. But the response is what gave me, like, the courage and the determination, and it told me I was doing the right thing. The response was wonderful.
I mean, so I'm also thinking of you being at NYU in the late 50s. Were there other African American students there? Were you alone?
This was made way before Black Studies, before the March on Washington.
I mean, that's really important to think about. This is made 10 years before the March on Washington happened.
Right. I mean, that was the benchmark.
Right.
The March on Washington. But it did have our prophets. Martin Luther King was to become Martin Luther King. He had just been successful winning the rights of Rosa Parks and others in Montgomery, Alabama, in 1956. Also in the film was Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was an assistant to A. Philip Randolph. And A. Philip Randolph, not many people know, organized the first March on Washington when Roosevelt was president. And Roosevelt was like, he's very afraid. And he asked him not to do it. So A. Philip Randolph didn't do it, but he got something out of it. He did not get into the White House. The march never took place, but they did pass fair employment practices. That's what black people got out of that after World War II, okay? So there was Martin Luther King, there was Bayard Rustin, there was a young African, Tom Maboya. Because at the time of this civil rights movement in the 50s, it was like a great awakening. And black people all over the world they have been to the war, fighting to free the world from democracy. That was the slogan. And then they came back home, the men and women who had been in the military, and they couldn't get a job. And the kids were going to lousy schools, segregated schools. They couldn't eat in certain places in their own hometowns. Why did they go to war? What did they get out of it? And so this stirred up the early civil rights protests in the 50s.
So when I want to talk about I Am Somebody,
All right.
which you will also see, and it's one of the most remarkable films for many reasons, but one thing that I just repeatedly appreciate is the centering of women, of Black women and their stories. And it is told through a Black woman is the storyteller. Those are the majority of the characters. And when you see it, you realize how absent women are from so many of the rest of our historical record. Tell me what your goals were with that. What did you see in that story that captured your attention?
First of all, it was the timing of the strike. The timing of the strike took place in this 69, okay. After Martin Luther King's assassination, there was a plethora of programs on TV for Black folks, because suddenly the media moguls had found out, hey, there's an audience for Black people. There were some cynics, I was one of them, who thought that this was not all about developing a Black audience, but it was about keeping Black people from looting and burning after the death of Martin Luther King, make some television shows for them and keep them home. That was very cynical, but I thought that. But anyway, what happened was Black Journal and all of these Black Power TV shows had been on, and we got too powerful, and the money began to disappear. And so there wasn't money to carry on this great golden age of television for Black folks.
Those, Black Journal would gather intellectual thought, would have, like I've seen footage of Vernon Jordan and, mixing it up with, a range of thought, which then shows you power.
And there was a great acceptance of these materials, of the material that was on, because people wanted to know.
Right, and it was a sharing of information in a huge
They wanted to know, and they wanted to be involved. There was a nationwide fan club associated with Black Journal. So that's how important it was. Okay. After Black Journal was winding down, and I had been an editor for 10 years, I said, I'm now, this is time for me to go back out. And I was looking for a project. Serendipity, local of number 99, which was one of the organizers of the strike, decided to make a film about the strike as an organizing tool.
So this was a strike of hospital workers, female hospital workers.
Right. I had been to the networks right before the Local 79 approached me, and they said, it's not a very important story. We have stringers, and we'll get little spots. And I said, no, this is big. It said, refused again. And here comes Local 1199. They want to make this film. And I had already done a lot of research on it, both in the film libraries and in print. So that's how I got to make Black Journal. I Am Somebody.
And so you had like a real budget, and because it's a beautiful movie. That's doesn't look like a cheap movie.
No. For the first time in my life, I had money. I submitted a budget and they accepted the budget. It was a realistic budget too, because I knew it was going to cost money to make this film. I had money. You know, there are two things involved in business, in film as well as any other business. It's time and money. I had the money, but I almost didn't have the time because I was pregnant with my fourth child. So
what'd you do?
I got on a plane, I went to Charleston.
So you were pregnant while you were directing this movie?
Oh yes, my baby was born 2 weeks before I finished the film. And that was my fourth child.
You know, this film was no joke. There was violence. You know, you will see from the footage. It does not look like an easy shoot. I have been on the shoot.
It was a difficult film to make, but
how did you get them to trust you? You know, coming in. I guess you had the union saying like.
Yes, and you know what? I had help from other states. Because of the way that I make my films, my films are made of on location and newsreel. And I started that method of making films because, number one, it gave me the possibility of being everywhere. Because I could collect newsreel footage, but I could also save my money for the real thing that I wanted to do. And that's what I did when I was making I'm Somebody. I got a roll of film from, I don't know who, but it was a newsreel photographer. And it had all of the, well, when you see the film, you see the high shots, you see the huge long shots, all of those difficult shots were newsreel footage. Because number one, you have to have time.
Yeah.
You have to have
shoot everything.
You have to have
Right.
staff.
Right.
They're very expensive to make. Yeah. So that's how I got this wonderful footage for I Am Somebody. Now the footage of the women, especially the narrator. When I got to North Carolina, the strike was almost over, but I did get the finishing of it. And it was never in my mind that I would have a narrator, a male voice, explaining what was going on in the film. That this was their film. And they ran it. I mean, they really did it. And this was my story.
Right.
It was my story fighting against politics, gender, and race. So I knew what they were doing. And some of my Hitchcock stuff is in there. When you see the woman with the stroller, that was me going down Fifth Avenue with the Mothers of Peace. So my story is in their story.
You have always made documentary and have said that is your genre. That is what you love. Tell us why you love documentary. Why does it satisfy your artistic desire?
Well, what influenced me to make films was to first of all, inform my people of their role and what they were doing, not only in the United States, but all over the world in the efforts for equality. Number two, it was to encourage their participation. And number three, it was to raise the self-esteem of my people. So I wanted to make films about real people in real time. But see, the wonderful thing about mixing newsreel with real footage, with footage of what was taking place at that time, is you can do all this cross-cutting, and you can almost control time.
You can. Before we open up to questions, you also had experiences at some of the most seminal television in American history at Children's Television Workshop and Electric Company. So I guess, yeah, there's some people here who've seen those. I mean, when I was little, everybody I knew watched Sesame Street and Electric Company. Literally everybody watched it. I remember thinking the orange puppets were black people. You know, so tell us a little bit about your time there. You know, Morgan Freeman, like being, you know, breathing those letters out. Like, I mean, that was an education of an entire generation. Right. That was probably one of the last times we had a common education.
Well, you see, I didn't make Integration Report 1, but my good fortune was to work on projects that did what I wanted to do: inform, encourage, raise the self-esteem. At the Children's Television Workshop, one of the statements in their mission was to raise the esteem of African American children. It grew way beyond that, of course, but that was one of their mission statements. And so when I got a chance to work at the Children's Television Workshop, it was after I made I Am Somebody. It was after I made I Am Somebody, and I took my film to the Flaherty seminar, and there I met the woman who was an executive producer in charge of filmmaking for CTW, and she was impressed with my work, and they were going through some trouble at the workshop at that time. And she asked me to come in and be a troubleshooter. And I said, well, I'll be a troubleshooter only if I can make films. Oh yeah, well, if you have time. But they didn't know, you know. I was troubleshooting, yeah, but I was making films.
Thank you so much. So we'll take your questions. Yes.
In South Carolina, they had just integrated my elementary school in 1967, and I really remember as a child, you know, just the ugliness of it all. And after the massacre at Mother Emanuel, when public television had their town hall, there was, in one part of it, a black woman who made a comment that, you know, to speak out about this stuff could risk people their jobs, and then the camera went to someone else, and I remember thinking, that right there, that's why so many people tend to stay quiet. So I just learned about you last week, listening to KPFA radio, and I turned it on when they were already talking about you in the movie, and I'm like, what is this lady's name? Is this playing somewhere? And I sat in my car and listened to the whole thing until I got information to be here, because having grown up there, I just can't say enough how brave you and those women were, and I'm just blown away by what you did, and so appreciative of it. So did the women get pushed back who were involved in this protest and strike?
The striking women. So what were the repercussions for the women who were involved in the strike? In I Am Somebody.
in I Am Somebody. Well, they won the strike. They won the right to have a union. They won, at the end of the film, you'll see the reporter asked one of the women, one of the leaders of the strike, they said, well, what did you get out of the strike? She said, well, I gained recognition as a human being. And that tells you that it was just as much about human relationships, money, and power. And these women gained it. They didn't keep it, but they gained it.
And you documented it, and you showed it, and you celebrated it. Who else? Yeah.
I want to thank you for first being an inspiration as a woman, as a filmmaker, and as a mother. I'm a filmmaker as well, and I'm a mom, and I'm a single mom, and I just feel thankful for you sharing your experience with us, and that encouraged me. If you did it, it gives me an inspiration for me to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, Ms. Anderson, could you tell us about, I read that you were involved with the public TV station at Howard University. Could you tell us a little bit about your involvement with that?
Were you at, is it WHUR?
WHUT, right?
Oh, WHUT at Howard University? Did you work with them at all in Washington, D.C.?
I went to work at Howard. I don't have my resume with me. I forget the years, but I went to work at Howard. First of all, I set up had my own production company, and I went to work at Howard after I worked at the Children's Television Workshop, because Howard was building a television station. They hired me to come in as a consultant because I knew of how public television worked. And they were thinking of getting into the public television network. So they hired me, number one, my title was broadcast fundraiser. The broadcast fundraiser wrote proposals to raise money, also to build audiences, and that's what I did.
Thank you.
For Howard.
You talk about King before he was king.
Yes.
You know, what was it like could you see greatness then? Could you see, what did you...
In King?
In King, what did you sense in seeing him before he was the person that we know? Early King.
Well, first of all, he was a man of God. I didn't broadcast it ever, but I am a religious person. I believe in God. There's no way I could not believe in God and do what I did in life without some deeper belief in someone who was helping me. Because I came from poverty to meeting kings and queens. How did I do that? Yeah, I worked hard. I had opportunities which I deserved, I thought. But there was always, I was in some impossible situations in my life. I was in dangerous areas. When I went to film in Monroe, there had just been, Negroes with guns, all right? That was coming to fore at that time. When I went there, the Klan was emboldened to ride through the area where we were shooting to frighten us, but we weren't, because of what the people there had done before we came. Wasn't anything that we did. But at any moment that could have turned into something dangerous and ugly and violent. And then when I went to the Middle East, I was a part of a production team, and I stayed behind after all the production was finished to mop up and to make sure that everything was done. That was one of my roles. One day, when I left the hotel foolishly, taking a walk, and I thought, well, it was a short walk in the hotel, and I just walked down the hill. All of a sudden, there was a mob of 12-year-olds following me, calling me names. I was scared, because at periodic places along the road, there were 18-year-olds with guns who were, the surveillance. I was scared. And the embassy was right across the U.S. embassy was right across the street from the hotel. But I was beyond that place geographically. So there were times in my life when I was in danger, because I wouldn't always say it was bad judgment, but it was part of what I was doing, and I was in danger a lot.
So we have to end soon, but I wonder if you watch films, documentaries these days, and if so, what advice you have for people who are documentarians, what you feel about the direction of documentary these days?
Well, it all depends on what kind of documentary you want to make. Documentaries were not very accepted as some kind of well, I wouldn't say entertainment. What would you say?
Really, kind of the block, but I'll tell
So
you
you would want to spend your time with, unless you wanted information, which was people talking to you.
My first film, I guess he was 10. My 10-year-old said, "This is like a real movie, Mom."
All right.
So it was a surprise.
Well, you're a documentary filmmaker, so you know that documentaries have grown in terms of entertainment. I wanted to make documentaries for a reason, and I never deterred from that reason. I never wanted to make a narrative film. When the black exploitation films were being made, I was offered one. But it wasn't that I was so much...
No Foxy Brown for you?
No, and it wasn't so much that I was judgmental against what our people were doing, because, hey, look, we got a chance to make films, so do it. No, I just didn't want to spend the time entertaining, because I thought my time was more valuable. in calling my people
Bless you.
to action.
Bless
Get
you.
in the struggle.
I think we all owe you a great debt for getting in the struggle. And thank you for being in the struggle then and now. And thank you for being here, traveling all the way here from New York.
I thank you for inviting me. I thank you for recognizing that the times that I come to make the value of them. And I thank you for supporting my journey.
We owe you.
Thank you.
We are going to see the films now, so we will do a quick changeover, and we'll get you out of here. So you can come watch the movies.
And I want to thank you